elder brother.
I see.
All right.
Oh, you're funny, John.
All right. So
Okay.
if we can start this long-awaited video. Okay.
Are you going to pose questions?
I'd say I have you. You can do most of the talking.
The talk show.
No, I like you to ask questions. It gives it structure.
The talk show.
I'd like to first talk about Mutti and Papa. First, you can tell me about what we were talking about earlier. Tell me and Rochelle about Mutti and her childhood. You can just go ahead and start.
Yes. Well, our Mutti, our mother, was the oldest of 6 children. And when her father died, who was a businessman, and they had a textile business, an open store in Rawowisko in Poland. When he died, she was only 10 years old, and there was the rest of the family, 5 younger children, 2 other sisters, and 3 brothers, and her mother. And her mother had her hands full, I should say, with 3 little children, and my mother was the only one who knew how to carry on the business. So at 10 years old, she became a businesswoman. And very often she had to go to the neighboring large town.
Also Lemberg of Love. Now it's known as Love,
Right.
and it now belongs to Ukraine, but formerly it was part of Austria, directly on the border with Russia.
And she
That
came...
was before World War I.
And it was even before cars or even trains were used a lot. She went there by horse and wagon and got merchandise for the store in Rawowisko, which was a smaller town. So she was a businesswoman, a full-fledged businesswoman from the age of 10, and remained that until the day she died. She was an outstanding businesswoman, and her talents came to very good use in later life. You tell us something about
Well, she was not only a businesswoman, she had probably the most intelligence in terms of a general interest. She was a reader in several languages. She became very active in the public library. She took books out galore.
Not only that, she built a very wonderful library for herself.
Yes,
You know that she had many volumes.
she continued to collect books. Of course, being the oldest sister, had many responsibilities. She could not really develop much of a formal education. I doubt that she went beyond the 6th grade.
But actually, you're quite right to bring
yeah.
that up, because she smarted later on in life under the fact that she did not have what she wanted, which was a really excellent
Had she lived longer,
education.
I wouldn't be surprised if she had enlisted in the college. She would have had the ambition to do so. And
Probably true.
she also was multilinguistic. She would speak quite fluently Russian, Polish, Ukrainian, Yiddish, of course, was her mother tongue, and German she learned. And then she was one of the early Zionists. She learned modern Hebrew quite well.
But you're forgetting English. She became absolutely
Well, that was
fluent.
after, not in her youth, that was after she came to America. She picked up English very quickly.
What about Papa and his childhood?
Papa was, as I told you before at table when we spoke, a boy who came from a rather well-to-do home. His father also died at a rather early age, but the mother was in charge of, I think it was milk.
They had a mill,
yeah.
and
Where were they born?
for grain, all kinds of peasants, and what the landowners would bring the harvest,
they would
grain,
bring the grain, and it was to be...
the mill turned it into flour, and he had a very...
As a matter of fact, I remember Papa boasted that his grandfather once stopped the whole Austrian army, and the way he did it was that a large part of the Austrian army was settled in and around Sambor, which was the hometown. And the army was supposed to move on. However, before they were to move on, the commander came to the papermill mill and asked that the mill
prepare flour for the army,
for the army. And it just so happened that that was in a late Friday afternoon. Shabbos had set in, and Papa's Papa, in other words, our grandfather, yes, our grandfather said, nothing doing. I'm not having that mill go until Sunday morning. In other words, Friday night was coming, Saturday the mill was closed, nothing before Sunday morning. And the whole army had to wait.
But there's another angle to this. The officer said, you open up the mill or else we'll shoot you. So he said, go ahead and shoot. Now when...
That's a very
yes,
nice
that was
story.
that. Yes, Papa told me that.
Yeah.
When Akiba Melech, that was our grandfather's name, when he put forth this challenge, the officer relented, and he had to wait his time until the mill was open.
Did you ever hear the story about Akiba Melech, how he came home without a shirt?
Yes, without a fur coat. He went to the mikveh, and had his bath as usual. I guess Friday afternoon was in the winter, and in the mikveh there was a very poor Jew who had only a thin suit. He had no warm clothes, and he went up to Papa and said, "Look, you are a wealthy man. You have more than one coat. Can I borrow your coat?" And Papa gave him the coat, and he went home from the mikveh without the sufficient clothes against the winter cold. And our grandmother gave him the devil. She rebuked him, and he said, "Look, I have many coats. This poor man had none, so I gave him mine." And that ended the story.
How did Mutti and Papa meet?
They met during the war when Papa was stationed in their little town called Ravarusta, and he was interested in the Jewish section of town. And so he asked where that was. He was directed to the place, and he often told me with great emotion that he was walking on the street when he looked up and saw the most beautiful girl that he had ever seen at the window. And then he dramatically said, "And when I looked up and I saw that beautiful girl, my heart stood still." And he did like this, "My heart stood still." And usually tears would come into his eyes. Then he told me that he decided this girl has to be his wife. On the same moment, he decided he must marry this beautiful girl. And so the next day, he made it his business to go back there and went into the open shop. And he got acquainted with the mother of this beautiful girl, which was my grandmother, and I named after her.
Mutti's mother was very favorably impressed by Papa. He was at that time, I think, a sergeant in the Austrian army, but
and a dashing young man.
He was attached to a German officer in charge of burials and notification of the dead of German soldiers who were also on the front. He was very comfortable, and when he inquired about Mutti, she must have given him encouragement.
Yes,
and
she was delighted.
And they brought about some kind of get-together. Oh, I also understand that, I heard this from Mutti and Papa, that he would go to the library to meet her there.
Oh, yes?
Because he was interested in books and she was interested in books. And then Papa got very involved in organizing a much larger library. This is something that Martha and Ed should know, that we also have in our family a history of a library organization.
Martha is interested in library.
Yeah, oh yes, they have a library organization in, is it Bet Shemesh? Yes, I think it's in Bet Shemesh, in memory of little Benjamin.
So, tell us the story about how Mutti was previously engaged.
Yes, she was indeed. She was engaged to the most eligible young man of her town, of Rabarusta, and he, coincidentally, was a lawyer just like you, Miss Chimomo, you know? And he was the most eligible bachelor and highly desired by all the young ladies of the town. However, Mutti, who was very pretty and very charming, was his choice.
At what age was she?
She must have been about 22 at that time. And so they decided to get engaged. He came from another town, not very far away. I forgot that little bit of information, except that he then set up a meeting with his parents and his future bride to introduce Mutti to his parents. They were snobbish and uppity, and my mother wasn't used to dealing with people who were uppity because she herself was uppity, and she usually had the upper hand. And here she met these people who were going to be her future in-laws, and they seemed to try and lord it over her. She didn't go for that. And it came to a little, what I understand, a little argument right then and there. So Mutti got up and said, "Don't you worry, I am not going to marry your son. Nothing will be further from my mind." And she stalked out. And it really came to a breakup of that engagement.
So I have another story. One of her suitors, I believe, was also an attorney by the name of Kovac. And he was crazy about her. And that was during the time that Papa also courted Mutti. And he wrote love letters in which he quoted various passages from the Bible, particularly from Shir HaShirim. One of those letters fell into the hands of Papa. He looked over this thing, and then he took a red pen and he corrected all the mistakes in it and showed it to Mutti.
And he sent it back to that young man, you see, with all the corrections. And he introduced himself as the number one suitor, you see.
That didn't help the courtship with Kovac. And so Papa somehow edged out the others, and...
well, of course, what really gave him the upper hand with Mutti, who was really a very, very, what I would call popular and flirty young woman, was the fact that he was living in Vienna before the war had broken out. And during his courtship of Mutti, told her that he had no intentions to stay in what was then Austria, but actually Poland, yes, but that he absolutely plans to return to Vienna to live permanently when the war was over.
You must remember that in that area, Vienna was the dream city. That was the city, the metropolis. It was the center of a big empire, of which
the glory days of Vienna,
the Ukraine and those areas were really provinces.
And when Mutti heard that here was a young man who was going to live in Vienna permanently, she said, "Are you promising me that you're going to take me to Vienna if I were to marry you?" He said, "Yes, absolutely." She said, "All right, that's it. I marry you."
Well, that may be one of the reasons.
It was the main reason, darling. It was the main reason.
Well, I think we should also mention the fact that they had a relatively similar background. Both came from very deeply religious homes, very observant, and both, Mutti and Papa, were rebels against the strict orthodoxy of their backgrounds. They did not get to hate it, but they rejected the strict regime of Orthodox living.
I can tell a little story about that. You probably can too.
I know many stories about that.
Papa told me that very often, that he rebelled completely against the religious faction, shall we say, of Sambor. He wanted to be in the new liberty, equality, fraternity movement that had sprung up, you know, and he was going to be the modern young man. And so to show his rebellion, he often went to the public restaurants in town, which were strictly non-kosher. And his mother, our grandmother, Dvorale, or Deborah, after which Debbie is named, after whom Debbie is named, didn't know about this. And so one day, one of the good neighbors of hers came to tell her this terrible story of her darling son sitting in the non-kosher restaurant eating non-kosher food. And he said, "Did you know this, Dvorale?" To which she said, "No, I didn't know that. But you know something? There are so many goyim in the world. Let my goy also live and be well." You know? So that was the way she took that, with a good deal of tolerance, actually, because she was very devout. I remember her very well because she came to live with us to Vienna when I was a very little girl.
Oh, you must have been about 4 or 5, and I was 7 or something.
Right. And she wore a sheitel. That was really
But
great.
she was very religious. She kept her own kitchen, had her own food. The story that you told was ended with a remark that was a little different.
Yeah.
Laura said, "Is that so? My son ate trace of food." And then she said, "Oy, oy, oy, Gott im Himmel, God in heaven, you let so many goyim live, let my goy also live." That's how she put it.
She was really quite a very wonderful older lady.
You got along with her as well?
Oh, yes.
Rochelle?
Rochelle was her darling.
I was her darling
Absolutely.
because of the fact, it's very well understandable now that I'm looking back at it, because I was my daddy's darling. You see, we had really what I would call almost a house divided. I was Papa's sweetie pie. I couldn't do anything wrong in his eyes. I was the sun and the moon going up every day. And Joshie was compensated because he was his mommy sweetie.
Mommy boy.
Yes, he
Right.
was a mommy boy. Our mother lavished love, attention, devotion, and everything else.
You got it
on
also.
Joshie.
You got it also. But
Yeah,
I do
got
want
something else.
to tell you about some of the hobbies of Papa. Papa grew up in a well-to-do home. One of his uncles, I believe, was actually mayor of the city of Sambor. The family was divided strictly between Mitnagdim, these were strictly halachic Jews, and Hasidim. Of course, you know what Hasidim are. And there was a kind of a tug of war between these two families. Papa grew up trained first in the traditional way. In fact, he told me when he started Cheder to learn his basic Hebrew and Torah, he was too young to walk. So his father carried him on his shoulders through the snow to the Cheder, and there he must have been about 2.5 or 3 years old, certainly not older. And there he would learn during the day, and then he'd bring him back. Later on, there was a modernistic wave that went through all of Poland and the Ukraine and Galicia, and they established public schools, high schools, and he went to a commercial high school, and that really may have been the major influence that modernized him, alienated him from his Orthodox tradition. But he had a few peculiar hobbies, one of which was raising pigeons. He had on the roof of his house, he had a whole, what would you call it?
A pigeon coop.
A pigeon coop.
Yes.
And I think ever since he developed a taste for raw eggs. And I would be astonished seeing him get, before his meal often, 2 eggs. He'd crack them, and he would drink the raw egg just as was, out of the shell.
Papa told me something else too about his pigeons. That was when he was a young boy, and lived at home. He had a pigeon coop up on the roof, and he was very fond of his pigeons. He had all varieties, including fancy kinds
homing
of
pigeons, who knows
yes,
what,
all kinds of pigeons. And he said that as a young fellow, he was astonished that every now and then very small little chickens were served at the table. And whenever he asked, how come such a little chicken? Oh, they used to tell him they were prepared for the meal at a young age. Much later on, he found out that it was his pigeons who were periodically served at table, but he wasn't told that that's where they came from. I guess these pigeons multiplied, so he was not able to really count and keep track of them. That's one of the stories he told us. And he remained a pigeon friend all his life. He loved pigeons. Yes.
So
that was that, and they actually did get married and moved to Vienna. Papa was
at what age did they get married?
I think our mother must have been already 25.
Close, going on 25.
Yeah.
Going on 25. And
they moved to Vienna.
And he was how old?
Papa was 4 years older. So he was just about grazing 30, I would say.
When they got married?
Yes. He was,
yeah.
He had a
when
very
he was
good
29,
time.
he was exactly 30 when I was born.
Yeah. So that is exactly
yeah.
correct. Yes, Papa was, as I told you, he lived in Vienna before the war, was a well-to-do boy, and he was able to afford to live in a very nice lifestyle. And he had some interesting prior history too before his marriage.
But he came to Vienna, I think, in 1905. At that time, he was approximately 26 years old, 24, 25 years old, something like that. He was in his early 20s. Then he came to Vienna, and he worked for a huge Swiss pharmaceutical corporation, which is still in existence, Hoffmann-La Roche. Hoffmann-La Roche is a world drug complex of companies. And he had a very fine job. He loved Vienna. He thought that was the greatest time of his life. And also at that time, Austria was very prosperous and had a stable government, and the monarchy was still strong. That was in 94, 95.
And the Viennese girls were very flirtatious, and Papa took advantage of this, let's put it that way.
Wasn't, relatively speaking, Mutti better looking than Papa?
Better looking than Papa. She was beauty. She was a true beauty.
And he was not at the level of beauty, would you say?
When you met him, he was already an older man. But in his youth, and I remember
in
the
his 20s,
picture,
he was very good looking.
he was dashing, actually. But unfortunately, Joshi, as much as I love him, I must forgive him the fact that he lost our family album. When he is indeed Joshi, and you know it, he was entrusted with our family picture album as we left Vienna together. It was a beautiful album, and it had pictures of our grandparents, of all the different children, and of Mutti and Papa when they were young. I think their picture of their weddings, of their engagement, and you could see that Papa was a very, very dashing young man, and he looked very elegant in his uniform. He had the best tailors make his uniform, and he, as I told you, he had a monocle, very distinguished looking young man, and also he used to boast to me, I'm sure also to you, Joshi, that he never, not even a single day, did he ever sleep in the barracks of the military. Wherever he was stationed, the first thing he did was go to the best hotel in town and would stay in the hotel and only come to report that he was around and then just left again.
Because his brother, you must remember, his younger brother, after whom I was named, Joshua, was an officer in the Austrian army. He was not a sergeant, he was an officer, and that caused his death. It was a tragic situation. He took his group of soldiers on some assignment, and being an officer, he was given the only bed that was in that large room. And so he went to sleep. All the other soldiers had to sleep on the floor. Unfortunately, the gas stove leaked, and since the gas, as you know, rises to the top, above the level of his bed, everything was poisonous, and he being above the bed level, he died of gas poisoning. The soldiers who were on the floor were alive.
Monoxide poisoning.
Yes, it was
It's
really
a kind
terrible tragedy.
of gas that you
Yeah.
don't really,
You don't smell
that
it.
you cannot really smell, and it is deadly. And he and all the other people who were stationed in a similar position died on that day.
Was back to Moti and Papa, if I can. What do you think that their relationship, one with the other, was on an equal basis, or would you say that one kind of loved the other more?
I think it was they complemented each other. They had entirely different talents. Moti was the extrovert who would very quickly make decisions and develop contacts. Generally speaking, her judgment was very good. She had a runaway enthusiasm, tremendous drive and enthusiasm, indefatigable. Papa was more methodical. He was more systematic. He would remember the facts and the details of every situation, keep careful records, and he would move more slowly, which often led to conflict. Now, theirs was a stormy marriage, but I believe it remained absolutely solid to the very end. And every major storm was followed by reconciliation. This amazed me, how often they would practically, well, they never used hands, they never used violence on each other, but they were verbally abusive at the heat of excitement and
there was
anger.
a lot of noise.
A lot of noise.
At home, a lot of noise.
But then they would very quickly make up, and I couldn't understand. All of a sudden, they were lovey-dovey again.
Well, actually, to come back to the core of your question, Mr. Momo, in my mind, there's no doubt that he, Papa, was very much more in love with Moti than the other way around. She liked him. She admired his methodical personality. She respected his strength, but he was totally head over heels in love with her, to the extent that it never abated, no matter what she did.
On the other hand, now, see, I always thought that too, until she practically killed herself trying to get him out of jail when he was imprisoned by the Nazis. This was the test, as far as I can see. I always had the impression that maybe she would have just as soon married someone else. But when Papa was taken away by the Nazis and put into a detention prison and tormented there for 3 days or so, it was during that time that she moved heaven and earth. She absolutely drove herself to the brink of a nervous breakdown. And in fact, she did have a nervous breakdown afterwards, but she did amazingly courageous things. She walked straight into the headquarters of the German Army of Occupation in Vienna.
It was actually the Gestapo.
Well, first the Gestapo, but then she didn't get anywhere with the Gestapo, but she managed to see the commander of the German troops in Austria, and it was unbelievable how she could get past the guards. She must have just sneaked right in. And she pleaded, and this fellow picked up the phone, I understand, and said, wait a minute, and he took pity on her or was moved. I don't know what happened exactly at that time.
Exactly.
Well, let's before we get into that whole story, why don't we start from the beginning of that portion of your and their lives. That is, I guess starting.
Was born.
At that time, you weren't around, so you can't say anything about it.
Well, okay. So then they moved to Vienna, and Joshi and Rochelle were born. What was it like, aside from Mutti and Papa's relationship between themselves only, growing up together in it was in Vienna, right?
Oh yes,
yeah.
Indeed.
And what was the name of the street that you were born? Both of you?
Gasse, that's where we live, little street.
Could you say that again?
Kulstotzer Gasse.
That is the name of a battle that was fought at one time.
The battle.
And what was the street number?
Number 3.
Number 3.
Number 3, Kulstotzer Gasse.
And what was the building like in the apartment?
It was a tenement building. It was a fairly decent but not luxurious building.
But it was very much like all the other buildings that were in those days the run-of-the-mill buildings in the inner city of Vienna.
I think we had first with a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, but life that was the immediate post-war period. You know,
yeah, what happened, unfortunately,
1920, 21,
we need
22.
to talk about the fact that they lost their money.
They made a lot of money, and they lost it all, and they made money again, and they lost it again, and then they went into different kinds of business. Now, to my mind,
the fact is that Papa came with quite a bit of money to Vienna, and his mother, our grandmother, followed rather shortly thereafter. She had made all her possessions in somewhat to money. She sold out and brought that money to Vienna, gave it to Papa, who was her only living son, and told him that she would like to stay with Papa and Mutti, and brought in all this fortune. It was really a small fortune. And Mutti and Papa invested it like all the other people in those days on the
they
stock
lost
exchange.
everything.
And then came the crash, as you know.
Yeah, but there was something else.
Of 29. Are you talking about the crash of 29? Which crash?
Even an earlier complete collapse. All of Vienna was really in a
ongoing
complex
economic
situation.
crisis.
Because the whole Austrian Empire had shrunk to nothing but Austria, and so now you had this huge city, was called the waterhead city, because it was a city befitting a large empire, and now was the city of a rather
It was
small
economically
country.
run down and a lot of unemployment, but something that you may or may not remember. I think I was maybe 2 years old, 3 years old.
I remember when you were
wouldn't
2
remember
years
that, and you were only 1 year old or something. It was at that time when Vienna was in dire straits and the economic situation of my parents was bad, that his sister, Cecilia, in Brooklyn, urged Papa and Mutti and also the grandmother, our grandmother, to come to America. And a few things happened. In the first place,
we should say that Tante Cecilia, our Aunt Cecilia, went to the United States before the First War even, directly from Poland, as one of the immigrants in that big wave of immigration. She had married in Poland, in Sambor, a jeweler by profession, by the way, and the two of them decided to leave in that way.
met a fellow by the name of Gottlieb.
That's it, right.
Yes, that-
And they went to the United States directly, bypassing Vienna. And when the economic situation in Vienna became rather desperate, she then wrote to say that they should all move, that is Papa, Mutti, and the grandmother.
But
I
now
wasn't born.
What
Now,
you,
let me tell you that when this letter came, including affidavits, in other words, the parents could have picked up their things in 1921, 22, there was a very, very real argument, a bitter fight between Mutti and Papa.
One of the many.
Yes. She would under no circumstances want to come to America, a land of gangsters and thieves and do nothing. And it had a America had a bad reputation.
She said, I never had a criminal record. Why do I have to
Right.
go to America
A lot of
like
thieves
that?
and people ran away from the law would become immigrants at that time. So she collapsed, actually, on the floor. I was told that very vividly. And so they changed their mind. They weren't going to come to America. Shortly afterwards, the grandmother was supposed to go alone. And she got tickets. But she fell ill on the train.
Papa had to go get
He
her.
had to go and get her before she could get aboard ship, bring her to Vienna, and then she started to live with us. This is more or less the way I remember it, I was told. And she lived with us for about
She lived
5,
with
4,
us
5
until
years.
I was about, I must have been about 6, no, not even, when she died.
Yeah.
You know, I don't believe I went to school yet when she
Yes.
died. So she must have been...
About 4 or 5 years, I think, at the most.
She must have died in
Yes.
around 1925.
But it was a very
1926.
important time. First of all, we both learned Yiddish.
From her.
From her.
She only spoke
Yes.
Yiddish.
Parents spoke to us mostly German, very rarely Yiddish. Among themselves, they spoke a lot of Polish.
Among themselves they spoke Polish. With us they spoke German. And with grandma they spoke Yiddish. And inasmuch as we were often, I mean, not only often, all the time, left alone with grandma and the maid. There was a maid in the house who spoke German, but grandma only spoke Yiddish and Polish, of course. She did not learn German. Josh and I had to converse with grandma in Yiddish. Our parents were very liberal at home. They were in business. They had various enterprises.
They also had a very active social life. They were active both in Zionist activities. They had a lot of things in common. I would not want to exaggerate the
split in
the
there.
split.
No.
I mean, they argued like crazy, but on the other hand, they had many bonds that united them.
And they also were in the coffee house.
Oh, they loved the coffee house life of Vienna.
What was the coffee house life like in your...
Oh, it was the social center because people's homes were not as luxurious as we are accustomed to, let us say, the States.
But they were not so spacious.
They were not spacious, and people would, and don't forget, the main meal in Europe and certainly in Austria was the noonday meal. You wouldn't entertain at noonday because you'd have to go back to your business. The evening meal was only a snack. So when did people meet socially? Usually in the coffee house after dinner, about 8:30. And then they spent 2-3 hours in the coffee house. And they had a large circle of friends, including quite a number of literary figures. They were both readers. Papa was an avid reader of serious magazines, mostly. And Mutti was a reader of novels of all sorts. But there was another factor in our family life that I think was very important. We've been, fortunately, despite all the reverses that we had, far better off than the rest of the family. We were saddled with a tremendous amount of responsibility for the impoverished family members who would stay with us. Sometimes a whole family of 4 would come and squeeze into our little apartment.
I'll never forget when Hannah
Yes.
and Shalom came with their parents.
Now, Hannah
Oh, God.
and her brother Shalom and her parents, four, all of a sudden snowed in from Ravaruska.
Without letting us know.
We didn't know they were coming, and there they were, and we had to.
Did you know
accommodate
that
them.
I opened the door to them? You don't know that. The bell rang one day, out of the blue.
What year was this?
Well, I was not
It
yet
about
in school.
26 or so, maybe.
Well,
26.
between 25 and 26.
Somewhere.
Bell
around.
rang, and Papa turned to me and said, Rochelle, always was called Rochelle at home, Rochelle, go open the door, see who it is. So I opened the door, and there were these four people standing, two grown-ups and two little children in the front. And I looked at them, and they said, you must be Rochelle. And I said, yes. And they said, well, we are your uncle and your aunt, and these are your cousins. And that was Hannah and Shalom and their parents. And I was absolutely flabbergasted, turned on my heels, ran back in, and I said, Papa, Papa, there is an aunt here and an uncle here and two little children, and they are our cousins. And Papa nearly dropped dead. He was beside himself. He went to look. He couldn't believe it, and here they were, the four of them. Here we are. Didn't have a place to go. Didn't have a place to
Didn't
stay.
have money.
Didn't have any money, and didn't know German. So there you are.
It was very tough on all of us, and certainly I'm sure it must have been very painful for them.
Yes.
Hannah's father was a Malamed. He was a follower of the Belzer Hasidic Rebbe. He was, I guess, a black hat. He was that.
And he was mainly a teacher.
A teacher,
when he was in Ravalos.
a
They
teacher,
came from Ravalos.
Hebrew teacher.
Why did they come?
They come because of the poverty of Ravaruska. And that was all.
They came with all of their things?
All, whatever they had.
They had very little to come with.
And Mutti had the job of finding for them a little apartment, helped them financially, and one way or the other, I don't know how they ever made a living. Then came Mutti's younger sister, Yitter or Ida, and she just lived with us for maybe 10 years, almost forever. Until she got married.
Yes.
And the big project of the family that lasted for years was to marry her off as best we could. I remember one situation where she found the right kind of guy, and he seemed to be madly in love with her, and he said, let me have a picture of you for my family. So she went to a top photo atelier, a photo studio. They took a picture of her, unfortunately with a very big décolleté. And when they sent that picture to the family, they were in shock. They thought that this was an immoral woman, and that it broke up the relationship completely.
But in the end, she did marry a very lovely man.
Yes, very nice guy.
And she was very happily married.
And then we had another family member who lived with us, and that was Uncle Max. Uncle Max was the youngest of all of the...
Mine, they came in succession. No sooner than one was on his legs and by himself, the next one arrived.
There was hardly a year when we had our apartment to ourselves. No matter what we did, there was always family members coming in.
Actually, you know, I asked once the parents, our parents, how come they all came in waves like that, and how come they came to us? Well, I was explained that the business that Mutti abandoned when she married Papa was given to these 5 children and the mother. And the 5 children didn't know what to do.
Yeah, they ran into the ground in the course of...
into the ground.
But one of them was totally unsuited. Uncle Arya was a yeshiva bocher.
Uncle Arya didn't
And
know
he
how to tie his shoelaces.
He escaped to Berlin and studied. Yes, and he was totally unsuited for the business. He was brilliant, but not suited. Gitte didn't know from nothing about business. Max was too young to run it. Hannah was a very sweet woman, but totally innocent of business. Hannah's mother.
Her name was
uh,
Leah. Amalia was her name. Leah.
Are you sure?
Yes. Yes, that was her name. That was
Malta was her name.
Well, they call her Amalia.
Her name was Malta, for
Malta.
sure. I know that. And she was really a very sweet, naive, kind,
but certainly not a
generally
businesswoman either.
big-hearted woman, but very impoverished. So Max came. Max was then a teenager, and he was a real pain to us because he always had a talent for getting into trouble. He was extremely talented musically. He could pick up a violin and immediately play. He had manual skills, but growing up at a young age without parents, he was undisciplined. And,
actually, we should really say that it was Mutti. She was the oldest, you see, so she was looked upon as the mother substitute for these younger children. And our dad became in lieu of their father, the father figure. And they looked to my parents, to our parents, as their parent substitute.
Of course, Papa's patience ran out, as it normally would, because it was expensive. We ourselves were not wealthy, and here we had all these extra responsibilities on top of us. It was a crushing burden. So it was the source of a number of arguments. Mutti felt that she had to do something. In that respect, Mutti was, I think, more generous than she should have been. She was a generous woman.
She was particularly very generous with her favorite, who was Uncle Arya. Now let's just face that. Uncle Arya, who couldn't tie his shoelaces, and that isn't a joke. He was clumsy.
Oh, he also lived with us, you know.
Yes. He was, however, brilliant, absolutely brilliant, a genius really, and charming. He was devastatingly charming for women because they loved the idea that he couldn't do things for himself. They loved to tie his necktie for him. They loved to tie his shoelaces for him. There was somebody that they could, so to say, cater to, and baby, he adored it, and he was adored by all the ladies.
But he had a stormy career.
Indeed.
See, we shouldn't be harsh on them because they were all orphaned at a young age.
I'm not harsh on him, but I know that Mutti lavished love and attention on him.
She probably favored him. He went straight from the yeshiva to Berlin, from a black hat yeshiva to Berlin, and there he enrolled in the high school. He hadn't before gone to any normal public school, only to yeshiva. I think within 2 years he graduated, then went to the university, and
he piled up several doctorates.
Incredible. He was first going to study medicine. Having been brought up in a strictly Orthodox home, he sort of strayed far away from it. He became a communist, but not really an active one, intellectually sympathetic with communism.
In fact, you have the book he wrote.
Yes, I do.
He went into philosophy.
Then he went into philosophy, and finally he turned into the rabbinate, being one of graduates of...
A rabbi who loved bacon. He adored bacon.
Well, then he became a reform rabbi. Wait, it's not the end of the story.
Rabbi before you?
Yes, he became a reform rabbi ordained by the Hochschule für die Wissenschaft des Judentums. That was the historic center of Reform Judaism in Germany. He had some renowned teachers, Leo Beck and many others, Ellbogen and who knows what. They were the lights of learning in Europe. And then he formed a close friendship with a woman who I think largely supported him, Paula.
It was not his only friendship.
He had a number of others, but this was one.
He was a real ladies' man. He was handsome. He was very tall, very handsome, very charming, and very helpless.
Very brilliant.
And this helplessness was so appealing to the women that he met that he was irresistible, you see.
Well, she supported him to get his doctorate in Switzerland, where he received his PhD. Then he went back to Germany, and then he was expelled.
He always visited him.
And then he was expelled from Germany, and there was no other place to go but to the Haberman's home in Vienna. So he lived with us for, 6 months or a year.
And he was how old then?
He was then, I would imagine, about 32, 33. I was then 15 or 16.
He was a real influence on
And
Joshua.
Rochelle, I think, was his favorite. He really loved you very much.
He loved me very much and loved to play chess with
He
me.
loved to play chess.
And I hated to play chess with him because I used to beat him. And the minute I would beat him, I was a good chess player when I was a kid, he would say, Rochelle, how did you do this? Let me see. And then he would go back several moves and say, well, then now let's
Start
see how
all
it
over
would.
again.
And I said, but Uncle Alex, you have been defeated. Oh, he said, that doesn't matter. Let's just see how it happens. And he infuriated me doing this, you know.
Well, now, there was a good side to it, because while he was with us and was being supported largely from us, by our means, he felt he ought to do something. So he would sit down with me 2 or 3 times a week for lessons in biblical Hebrew and Mishnah. We even got into Talmud. We discussed philosophy, and he gave me a very fascinating introduction into the study of Judaism, which became a factor in my decision to become a rabbi. Certainly not the only factor, but one.
I think a very important one.
It was a significant one.
How about the gambler?
Max, that was Uncle Max. He was a shady character in the family. Every family's got to have one. He gambled recklessly, earning fairly decent living time as a typewriter mechanic.
That's right. I think we have to give him credit for that. The others had no profession.
He developed at least the skill of being a typewriter mechanic. Then he'd buy and sell typewriters. He made some money there, but whatever he made, he would gamble. One day, we were horrified to hear that he rushed back home to us. He had already lived elsewhere in a little apartment, and told us that either the police would be after him or a gang of gamblers were out to kill him because he hadn't paid his gambling debts.
And in addition to which, he has done the following. I remember that because there was a terrible stormy session at home. My father was absolutely livid. My father was a very Papa was a very, very straightforward, very
law-abiding
citizen, beyond law-abiding, meticulous. And this Marco told our parents that he had taken some typewriters to be repaired and had repaired them, but instead of returning them to their owners, had decided to put them into the
pawn
shops because he figured he'd make some money by gambling, then he would take them out and take them back to the rightful owners, and it didn't pan out.
It didn't work out. He was in danger of being killed. So, what was there to do?
Dad, Aunt Rochelle is now already gone back to the States. Today is the 26th of December, 97. How are you doing?
Fine, considering that this is my 78th year, and I'm sort of midway, going on to 79. I'm grateful for good health and good spirit. I have now survived my father by just about 1 year, and so far the prospects are good. We have wonderful family, large family, much larger than we ever hoped or dreamt we might, and so we feel very blessed. I want to tell you about my earliest memories because you asked me beforehand what was my life like in Vienna as a young child. I told you beforehand that we had many of our family members come and not just visit but stay with us. But my earliest memory was probably a trip to Sambor and Rabaruska. Sambor, the town where my father was born, and Rabaruska, the town where my mother was born. And I recall a very long train ride, and when we came to Sambor, we stayed in a big house. I believe it was near the center square, and Rochelle at that time was a very small child, approximately maybe 2.5 years. I may have been 4 years, a little over 4 years. And my first memory, believe it or not, was a tremendous toothache that I had in Sambor. And I was given some kind of treatment by the local dentist. It seemed that I did not need to have the tooth pulled. I don't recall much more about Sambor. In Rabaruska, I can only remember kind of a village with again a large square, and don't recall any of the people there I saw.
All right, let's talk about Vienna.
Vienna, for us in those early years, when I was 4 or 5, was a pleasant enough existence. Our fairly small apartment, I don't think we had more than 3 bedrooms, 3 small bedrooms, was located near a park alongside the canal, the Vienna Danube Canal.
And that was on what street?
That was in the Stotzergasse, in the 3rd district. It was a tenement house. We were, I believe, on the 2nd or 3rd floor. And at that time, my parents had been in the retail business. I don't exactly know what kind of business it was. They had made a lot of money, then lost most of it due to a stock market crash. Then the inflation came, and this and that. And they had a lot of ups and downs in business. And that was the time when Hannah's parents, Uncle Laser and Aunt Malka, and Hannah and Shalom came to visit with us.
So when you were in, let's see, Rochelle was only a year and a half younger than you. What were your years, say between your grade school years like? Where did you go to school?
I went to school approximately 10 minutes walk from our apartment, not much more. And my 4 years in the primary school were basically uneventful. I remember one incident. There was one kid, a boy in my class who was very abusive and anti-Semitic, and who would, from time to time, push me or hit me or something. One day, as he did that, I made up my mind I was going to hit him back. And I not only hit him back, but I really gave him a terrific beating. And on top of that, when he started crying, went home, I went with him to his mother and told the mother that this boy had called me all kinds of anti-Semitic names, and I had hit him as a result. And the mother was, as I recall, she was 7 or 8 years old, something like that.
Do you remember any anti-Semitic experiences?
There were a lot of them, and
Others.
there were anti-Semitic slogans. Once I decided that since all the kids were Catholics who were not Jewish, one day I decided I'd go to the priest. Must have then been about maybe 8 or 9 years old, and complain, because the church of the neighborhood, a very large Catholic church, was directly opposite our school. The school was a public school. And I walked into the church, looked for the priest, and I complained that these boys were nasty and mean and made these anti-Semitic remarks. And I do recall making my plea with the question, wasn't Jesus Jewish? And that was my first religious interest or awakening to the religious issues. The priest was non-committal. He wasn't unfriendly, nor did he show any great concern. In any event, it's one of the few memories of that period that sticks in my mind, aside from a very close friendship with my good old buddy Moshe Meisels. At that time, his name was Manfred Meisels, and his nickname was Burley. We became friends, I think, when we were about 5 years old or so, and we were inseparable. We played every day together. He was a very good soccer player. I was not, but still we played together with the other boys in the park.
And he's the guy that you talk to almost every day here in Israel.
Oh, he's the guy that I still talk to almost every day, and if I'm in the States, that we correspond. He came from a very Orthodox family. That was my introduction, really, at an early age to Orthodox Judaism. That is to say, I had only occasionally gone with my grandma, who lived with us for a while and who was very observant. I'd gone occasionally with her to a little Orthodox shul about 5 minutes walk from our apartment. And there was Worley's father, who was a renowned Talmudic scholar. And after a while, of course, I was invited quite often to his home.
How far away did he live from your house?
Oh, no more than 5-6 minutes.
Walk.
Walk, yes. So I remember very clearly the Kiddush ceremonies that we had on Friday night or early Friday evening at Worley's home. It made quite an impression. Worley, though, even in his earliest years, was anything but religious and inattentive and not particularly observant in any way.
Were you remained friends with him throughout your stay in Vienna?
Well, after we graduated from primary school, I went on to a gymnasium, a Real Gymnasium, that is a academic high school of a general nature. He went on to the highest gymnasium, which was a Hebrew day school, you would call it, a very fine institution. And I really am surprised that my parents did not send me there as well, because that was the elite Jewish school in Vienna. We had a Zionist orientation. Hebrew education was a top subject, and I should have gone there. But I believe that practical considerations moved my parents to have me go to the public school. They thought that I would have a better career chance if I graduated from public high school.
When you were, hold on, let's stop. You were around bar mitzvah age. What was it? What was going on then?
Well, my bar mitzvah was a far cry from what we are used to here in Israel as well as in America at this time. A bar mitzvah comes only second to a wedding in the States, and even here in Israel it is celebrated with a lot of dinners and who knows what entertainments. In Vienna at that time, my bar mitzvah was a very simple affair. I believe it was a weekday. I was called to the Torah in the major inner city synagogue, known as the Seitenstätten-Gasse Temple. And all I was asked to do was to recite the bracha during my aliyah, before and after the reading of the Parshat HaShavua. And that was it. There were 3 or 4 other boys with me, and I don't recall anything further, certainly nothing in the synagogue.
Did Rochelle have a bat mitzvah?
Rochelle, I don't believe, had a bat mitzvah. However, following the synagogue service, that evening we had a family party, and some friends came over, and I just made a few remarks, just thanking everybody. That was it. And there was no great festivity about it. I would like to tell you, though, that life in Vienna, for us, up to the age of about 13, 14, was really not threatening. It was later on, in our upper teenage years, that anti-Semitism became violent.
That was what, about
Let's say
1935?
1931, 32, things were reasonably normal. I told you about anti-Semitic remarks. Of course, that was a daily occurrence, but it wasn't anything violent. We enjoyed many pleasant Sunday outings in the Vienna woods. We often went Sunday afternoon, let us say, to the Stadtpark, the city park, and there was an outdoor concert, which was very lovely and enjoyable.
At what age?
Only about 9, 10, 11. Let's say in the years 1929.
You went to classical concerts at that age?
Not yet, not at the age of 10 or 11. But when I went to my high school, the so-called Stubastei High School, the Realgymnasium, Stubastei, that was the name of it. There, the school authorities provided extremely cheap theater and opera tickets. And I think beginning at the age of about 14, 15, I would go quite often to the major state theater called the Burg Theater and the opera, and was very much impressed by the performances. School for us was a full-day job. We would start early in the morning at 8 o'clock. I would usually take the streetcar. Rochelle's school was a little closer to home, and so she generally walked over. She went to a Real school, that is a high school without Latin, without the classical language education. In my high school, we still had 7 years of Latin and about 4 or 5 years of French. And the school day would start about 8 o'clock.
You spoke Latin, or you?
No, this was a reading.
Right.
You would have to be a genius to speak Latin, and it wasn't required. But we had a great deal of Latin reading, and it was a full and comprehensive academic program, starting with school at 8 o'clock and ending usually at 1, but there was a lot of homework, and there were 6 days a week, from Monday through Saturday. And my class of about 25 or 30 students was about not quite 1/3 Jewish. The rest were nearly all Catholics, one or two Protestants.
When did things start to get rough and...
Well, things began to be very turbulent when there was, first of all, something like a civil war in the early 30s, I think about 1932, when the socialists staged a revolt, an armed revolt. They were trying to overturn the government because they feared the right-wing Christian socialist regime was going to take on the methods of a semi-dictatorship, and they feared that they were going to be disbanded, so they staged an uprising, and I remember hearing gunshots and whole districts which working people lived were bombarded and suffered a great many casualties. Now that was a very serious disturbance, and it was around that time, shortly after, that Hitler rose to power. Starting with the year 1932, 1933, anti-Semitism became violent. Nazis began to march through the streets. There were beatings of Jews at the university, and that kind of news very profoundly affected me because it made me examine my own Jewish identity. I wanted to know what was all this hostility about. Why did they attack us Jews?
Did you ask your parents?
Oh, we had frequent discussions about anti-Semitism, and the attitude of the parents generally was that these Nazis were hoodlums and they are not going to win power. They will not seize the government. In fact, they almost succeeded before Hitler even marched into Austria because there was a conspiracy. They captured the chancellor, that's an office comparable to prime minister, and they shot him. They killed him. Later on, the army and police were able to overpower this group and reestablished order, but it was only for a few years.
And when approximately when did that happen, when they shot the chancellor?
That was, I think, around the year 1935 and 1936, and his successor tried to solidify the hold of his party upon Austria, and it was very clear that the Nazis were getting ready for a takeover. Meanwhile, ironically, our parents' business flourished, and we could say that we reached a certain level of modest wealth, so much so that we moved to a much larger apartment, had it very beautifully furnished, lived a comfortable life. We would take at least a month, possibly 2 months of summer vacations in a nearby resort where we rented most often a lovely little cottage, and Mom and Rochelle and I would stay there, and Papa would come out usually by Thursday and stay till Monday, something like that.
What did you used to call your mother?
Mutti.
You called her Mutti?
I called her Mutti, and Papa was Papa.
Yeah. And why is it that the Austrians are known as the most anti-Semitic people?
I have,
according to some people.
I have no doubt that the Austrians were, and maybe still are, the most anti-Semitic people in Europe. Largely, I think this is the work of the Catholic Church. Austria was the seat of the so-called Holy Roman Empire, which was ruled over by the Habsburg dynasty for something like 1,000 years, 700-800 years, but very long. And the Catholic Church's influence was enormous. not only were they intolerant of Jews, but in one or several parts of Austria, the considerable Protestant population was actually driven out of the country because they were Protestants. They were expelled. Now, Jews in Vienna had a fitful history. At times, they were persecuted. There weren't that many. There were maybe a few hundred, maybe up to a couple of thousand at any given time during the Middle Ages. And then at other times, they were reinvited because they played an important role. At one time, all the Jews were herded together and publicly burned to death. So there was a history of persecution,
but you're
alternating
speaking
with a kind of benevolent protection.
This was historically speaking.
Historically speaking. But the culture of Austria was saturated with anti-Semitic legends, anti-Semitic notions, and the church was chiefly responsible for maintaining this hostility, based first upon religious grounds. Later on it became racial and ethnic, because Jews had separated and they were viewed as a foreign element in the nation.
When the Nazis started to take control or get closer to the Anschluss, what was that like?
Well, at that time, I went through a very long period of serious introspection. I was worried about my future. I could sense that some terrible things lay ahead in years to come. We're talking now about the time when I was 15, 16. Those were the years 1934 and 5 and 1936. Hitler was in power. Radio programs featured the speeches of Hitler, which were terribly frightening. And I remember listening to Hitler as a speaker. He was a spellbinder, no question about that. In many ways, he reminds me today of Louis Farrakhan in the United States, except that Louis Farrakhan has none of the power that Hitler had. But Hitler was a spellbinder, and he made sure that the masses were constantly agitated against Jews. And
did you know anybody who actually saw Hitler?
Well, not at that point in my life when I was 15 or 16, because Hitler was in Germany, I was in Austria. So the people in Austria did not have a visual impression of Hitler, except if they saw Hitler's face in newsreels, which were sometimes featured in the movie theaters.
Do you know anybody in Germany? Parents
No.
have any connections with people in Germany?
But some of my Austrian classmates who remained in Austria during the war, no doubt must have seen Hitler. Well, in any event, I was in turmoil inwardly. I did not know what I would want to do in the future. To my parents, it was very clear. Hitler or no Hitler, they thought that we had an excellent business and that I should prepare to take it over. But I was really not minded to do that. I wanted to live abroad if possible. I was thinking of Israel. I was then a high school student, getting closer and closer to my graduation. Meanwhile, I had developed a very gratifying social life. I had a good many friends. We had parties, and Sister Rochelle would come along. She was forever grateful that she was not left behind alone, but that she also was able to meet people and enjoy the entertainment of these parties. And when I got to be about 17, I decided that possibly I wanted to become a rabbi and study. I kept that first to myself. Now there's a little background to this. I think it was in the year 1935, 1936, when I was 16, that Uncle Ariel, who was an ordained Reform rabbi, he had his doctorate in philosophy. He had lived in Berlin, and he was expelled from Berlin because he was not a German citizen. Came to live with us temporarily in Vienna, and in return for room and board, he instructed me in various Jewish subjects. Took up Hebrew with me, introduced me to the reading of the Bible in Hebrew, Mishnah, Talmud. We had a number of discussions about philosophy, ethics, and so on.
And you were how old?
I was then about 16 going on to 17 during that crucial period, and I think he had a significant influence. But aside from Arya, the turbulent times challenged me to think and to read very seriously. And I began to read some of the German modern classics, the novels of Thomas Mann, the poetry of Rilke, Hofmannsthal, the novels of Dostoevsky, European writers of stature. Why did I read them? I guess I was looking for some understanding of the meaning of life and searching for some ideals, something to believe in. I was not yet religious in any real sense, but I was keeping an open mind on the question of God and Judaism and the Jewish contributions to civilization. The constant barrage of anti-Semitism challenged me to really look more deeply into the whole question of where did the Jews come from? What made them the center of this attention? Even though it was hostile attention, it certainly seemed to be evidence of the importance of the Jews in European history and civilization. And that's why around the year 1936 or so, when I was 17, I made up my mind for the first time that I would study Judaism as part of rabbinic training. When I told that to my parents, it was the most shocking news that I could have given them. They were dumbfounded. And I guess, you know, as I told you, that the first reaction of my parents was, well, there's something wrong with me mentally and I should see a psychiatrist.
What did you say to that?
Well, I wasn't exactly eager to go to a psychiatrist. I discussed the matter further with them, and then finally we worked out a compromise. It was not necessary for me actually to see a psychiatrist because the compromise was reasonable. The parents said, look, you are our only son. It's for you that we build up this business. We expect you to take it over and live comfortably. Why don't you study? Finish your studies, and then you go into business. Meanwhile, of course, I had to tell them that combined with my rabbinical study would have to be an academic program leading toward a PhD. So this would have been a commitment of many years, at least 5 to 6 years. But the parents were willing to do that, assuming that they could there would be the business waiting for them. They did not take seriously the idea that I could ever practice as a rabbi in Austria. What I did not say to them at that time, because, now why would I not practice? Because there were very few congregations open, and there was an oversupply of rabbis. Somebody mentioned to me that I would have to wait something like 20 years before there would be an opening. Chances are that I would never be called to a pulpit. But that did not faze me for a reason which I did not disclose to the parents. I had no intention of remaining in Austria. I agreed to the compromise only because I wanted to study. But my real intention was to leave Austria as soon as I was old enough to do so. And I did not have to wait very long, because in 1938, March 1938, there all of a sudden came the solution, which was
Immediately before Hitler came, what was it like at the university?
Well, I only spent one semester at the university, and it was a very threatening time. I could see the Nazi Party, which was underground at that time. It was outlawed in the under the Austrian regime, but that didn't seem to bother them, because I could see Nazis all over the place with their swastika emblems. I studied philosophy and the Syrian language. It was a weird experience. The professor of Syriac was a renowned scholar in his field. His name was Christian. To my mind, the class was pleasant enough. There were about 4 or 5 priests, a couple of Protestant ministers, and I was the only rabbinical student. And it was much later that I learned that he was a confirmed Nazi. And immediately after the Hitler Anschluss, he came out in his Nazi uniform on the campus of the University of Vienna. The professor of philosophy whom I had was a Catholic philosopher of distinction, anti-Nazi. His name was Alois Demps, and I remember the course to have been extremely interesting, with a very large class of maybe over 150 students. At the Israelitisch Theologische Lehranstalt, that is the theological seminary where I attended, I really had to make quite an adjustment. I took a number of courses.
Excuse me, wait a minute. What do you mean, did you switch?
I attended both institutions at the same time. I had a terribly full day of instruction at the University of Vienna, and then also at the Israelitisch Theologische Lehranstalt. I was last Austrian to enroll, and in fact the only Austrian student that year to enroll in that seminary. And most of the students were from other countries, Hungary and Czechoslovakia, Romania and Poland. And it was a small school. I think they had maybe less than 40 students, but they had world-famous professors. The mood in the seminary was dreary, because everyone lived in anticipation of some great political crisis, either the outbreak of a world war, World War II, or the invasion of Austria was certainly feared. People probably would happen. Some deluded themselves with the hope that it might not. In any event, this was a difficult time. I hardly fitted into the situation, because I was not prepared academically to profit from the instruction in advanced Hebrew texts that I could barely follow, and certainly lacked the adequate preparation that I should have had. But it was my good fortune, because as soon as the Nazis marched into Austria, I was called in within a matter of weeks. I was called in by the president of the theological seminary, who told me that the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati had tabled an invitation to 2 students to be designated by him. His name was Professor Samuel Strauss, to come to America and to continue their rabbinical studies. And he asked me, would you like to go to America? So I didn't think for a moment. I immediately said yes. So then he told me that he would recommend me because I was the youngest, and that it would be easier for me to make an adjustment in the course of some years before becoming a rabbi to serve an American congregation than it might be for an older student.
So you were ready to leave Austria without your sister and your parents?
Well, no, I wasn't thinking of leaving them if I could possibly do something. I did. In fact, I acted that way. I had warned my parents months before Hitler came in that it was only a matter of a short time, and I'm sure the Anschluss annexation of Austria would happen. My parents absolutely turned a deaf ear on this, and I had some very heated discussions with my parents about it, and they forced me to shut up about it. I didn't want to hear it. The day or 2 days after the Nazis marched in, I was already standing in line in front of the American embassy requesting immigration papers. And I brought them home. I had the parents and Rochelle sign all the papers and immediately delivered them to the embassy requiring or requesting an immigration visa. This was a godsend because without it, my parents would have never been able to come. As it turned out, my sister Rochelle and I received the American visa within 2 or 3 months, and in the summer of 1938, the Anschluss was in March, so it was about 3 or 4 months later, we were already on our way to the port of Antwerp in Belgium, where we boarded the ship to New York.
Why didn't your parents get the visa as early as you did?
My parents could not get their visa that early for this reason. The American immigration laws had a quota system for every country of origin. So many people were allowed into the United States as immigrants if they came from England or from Ireland or from Germany or France or Poland. Now, the Austrian immigration quota was not yet really used up. And since we applied first, my sister and I, born in Austria, we were very quickly given the visa. My parents, who were born in Poland, came under the Polish quota, and the Polish quota was not as generous, and so they had to wait. And as a result of this difference, they lost about a year and a half almost. It was not until December 1939 that they were able to leave Austria and come to America.
Before you left, there were some scary situations, scary scenes that occurred between you and your wasn't it your neighbor downstairs? What happened with that?
Yes. Of course, every day was scary. You were likely to be bothered on the streets. If you identified as a Jew, you would most likely be the object of either abuse or physical violence, or you might be incarcerated without any particular reason.
Keep it a little bit louder, Dad.
Yeah.
Go ahead. All right.
So there were many attacks upon Jews, physical attacks. And before long, of course, Jews were excluded first from public parks and then from public transportation, and all kinds of restrictive legislation was enacted. But in my case, I was spared most of that because I was out of the country before these laws really became effective. And there was another helpful point, and that was the action of my aunt in Brooklyn. That's Papa's sister.
But before we get to that, what about your neighbor downstairs?
Well, I'll tell you that too.
What was the scary incident that occurred?
Well, there were two very scary situations that developed even during that short period of time that I remained till we left. In the first place, Papa was arrested and held, I think, for 3 or 4 days. And during his arrest, he was physically abused. He was made to stand up against the wall, I think, for 12 or 14 hours, not given any food, not allowed to go to the toilet, and beaten, and he was very roughly handled. Any number of Jews could not survive this sort of thing, and they died or they were shot, who knows. In that brief interim, Mutti did the unbelievable. She went to see chiefs of police and leaders of the Gestapo and generals of the army. I don't know how she managed it, but she had tremendous drive and courage, and somehow she managed to obtain an early release of Papa so that he would come back and recover. As soon as he returned and when he told what happened to him, it so affected Mutti that she had to be taken, she had a nervous breakdown, she had to be taken to a sanatorium for at least, I think, a month. In the interim, my parents continued, that is to say, Papa continued to operate his business, but there was already a Nazi official who would oversee the business operation and obtain a substantial cut of the income that was generated. I had a close call, too, because there was a unemployed fellow, approximately 21, 22, who lived in the cellar of our tenement building, of our apartment building, and this fellow was a handyman. He was unemployed. He was basically a very simple fellow, and I knew that he was a militant Nazi, although he was friendly to me personally, and we used to give him jobs to paint the apartment or to carry bundles or who knows, whatever it was, all kinds of jobs. One day he took me down to the cellar. That was shortly before the Anschluss, and he said, "I want to show you something." And down in the cellar he had a huge cabinet. He opened the cabinet and it was an arsenal of weapons, guns and automatic weapons and pistols and whatnot. I said to him, "Please close this thing up and don't let anybody know, because if this were known, you'd be arrested and who knows what kind of punishment you would get." Well, he smiled and just wanted to brag. There was not much long after that, maybe 4 or 5 months, that the Anschluss actually occurred. And I think within a month or so, he showed up at our apartment, this time spick and span in his Nazi stormtrooper's uniform, and he said to me he had an order from headquarters to arrest me and take me. I looked at him. I was obviously very scared. And then he sort of thought and then turned to me and said, "Listen, get into bed and I'll tell him that you are sick." And I couldn't take it. I don't know whether he made this whole thing up or whether he wanted to scare me or whether there was really an order. I will never know. In any event, I did go to bed. I was never again bothered. And it's possible that he did have such an order to pick me up, and that out of some kind of feeling of compassion or whatever you may want to call it, he decided not to carry out the order.
Tell me the story in more detail about how Mutti obtained the release of Papa.
Well, she was unstoppable. She found out who were the major military authorities in the occupied city of Vienna, and finally she managed to practically push her way through the headquarters of the general staff that was sitting then at that time in Vienna, and she just walked without having any permission to do so. She walked into the office of one of the leading generals, and she pleaded. She said, "My husband is a merchant. He has never been in politics. Please let him go." And he must have moved her. She must have moved him somehow, and apparently he picked up a telephone, gave an order to release him. And that's how he got out of it.
Your mother, after he was released, you said became ill.
But she had nervous breakdown, exhaustion, and nervous tension, and the terror, all that took its toll. And it was a very difficult time for us. I do want to mention to you that our aunt in Brooklyn, with whom we had hardly been in contact, Aunt Cecilia was the full name, also obtained affidavits. Those were the documents needed by immigrants that they would not become a burden to the country. These affidavits were very helpful in speeding our immigration visa. Curiously, it was probably some 15 years earlier, around 1922-23, that the same aunt had even sent tickets for the overseas travel from Austria to the United States for Papa and Mutti and ourselves and our grandmother to come to America. And that was in, I would say, approximately 1922, 1923. I do remember that Mutti practically fell to the floor. She prostrated herself. She said under no circumstances would she leave Vienna and go to America, which to her was something like the Wild West. And she refused to take advantage of this opportunity. Who knows? Who has the wisdom to foretell what life's course would have been had we gone to America at that time?
And tell me more about how you and Rochelle dealt with this extremely difficult time when between the period that your father was arrested, and your mother, and when he returned, and following that, when your mother became ill. You and Rochelle.
Well, it was a time, obviously, of great fear. We would do the best we could to hope and pray for Papa's release. Mutti would be with us overnight, naturally, but otherwise we were on our own, and there was nothing we could do. We tried to be as little as possible out in public, fearing that any one of us might be picked up, who knows. Although I still had a friend at the University of Vienna who was a Gentile, who was an anti-Nazi, with whom I might meet once in a while for coffee. I tried to avoid crowds. I do remember seeing Nazi officers and try to avoid being in the public. Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, go on.
Yes. Well, among the ugly memories that I have are Nazi stormtroopers marching through the streets and singing their anthem, which is known as the Horst Wessel song. Horst Wessel was a pimp and a gangster who lost his life in the street brawl, and he composed the song, or he was the leader of a song, And in this song there's a line, we will rejoice when Jewish blood spurts from our knives. Now that particular line, of course, settled in my mind and consciousness, and I took it very seriously, that these guys wouldn't hesitate one moment to kill a Jew if it pleased them to do so. Rochelle and I were very close in those days. We would meet with a small circle of Jewish friends of our age, try to somehow put a brave face upon the situation. Everybody was talking about leaving the country. Where we would be and what we would do was very uncertain. I could not count on being a rabbinical student. I did not know how to support myself, so I did a couple of things that nowadays I look back upon it kind of funny. I thought that possibly a source of income might be photographic work, and so I took training in developing films. Incidentally, prior to my entry at the University of Vienna, which was in the year 1937, I prepared myself for the university by taking up a course in boxing, so that if attacked, I would be able to defend myself. That gives you an idea as to what the mood of those years was actually like.
Did you ever have a chance to use that skill?
No, I was never really attacked. I was lucky in this respect. But I took it seriously. And we counted the days when we would finally leave. It was a very painful time when we knew we would have to leave our parents at home. We could not foretell the future. We were worried about living in America, not knowing a word of English, and yet we somehow went forward and had the courage to do it, and most likely because there was no better alternative.
What was the date that you left, approximately, do you remember?
We left Vienna toward the end of, latter part of July, maybe July 25th, 26th, and we arrived in New York on August 1st or 2nd.
38.
1938.
What was the trip like back there?
Well, first of all, we took the train to Antwerp in Belgium. And I remember when crossing the border of Germany, what a moment of liberation it was. It was a wonderful feeling. Antwerp was a lively port city. We only stayed there, I guess, a few hours before we boarded the ship. We got aboard ship, and it was a wonderful feeling. It was a luxurious crossing. There were passengers from all countries, quite a number of Americans. Very soon, I became friendly with a family from Connecticut who had a daughter of Rochelle's age, with whom I would chat as best I could in French. We would go to dances. It was a lovely and in many ways an amazing contrast to the life of tension that we had in Vienna.
How long was the ship?
About 8
right?
days.
8 days.
8 days. When we arrived in Brooklyn, we were met by our aunt and her daughter, Clara. Both Rochelle and I had a number of gifts for them in our luggage, and we were taken to their home, to their summer home, actually in Long Beach, I think. It was somewhere in Long Island, where we spent about 10 days or 2 weeks. And then I took the train to Cincinnati.
What was the boat ride like?
Oh, very pleasant, except for the first 2 days when I was seasick. And then the funniest thing happened. Rochelle was furious that I would not leave my cabin, because I was, of course, throwing up all the time, and I did not want to even step outside of it. Made me sick to my stomach as soon as I would move outside. But she insisted when they announced an evening of waltz dancing. She said she had no partner. She gave me a terrific spiel. She said I must go with her no matter what. So I did the best I could, got dressed, walked outside with her, and again was about to throw up once more when we got into the dancing hall, and she insisted that I dance the waltz with her. I did, and for some reason, it was very odd, the motion, the circular motion on the dance floor made me forget the up and down swinging of the ship, up and down motion of the ship, which causes this seasickness. And I got over my seasickness dancing the waltz with Rochelle and then with a few other people whom we met aboard ship. It was
and that honor was
a very nice, pleasant, relaxing trip. I remember the orchestra composed of American students who played the dance music, and the most popular song at that time was a song that began with a Yiddish line, "Bei mir bist du schön, bei mir hast du Chen." That means you are beautiful in my eyes and you have grace and charm. And I was amazed that a Yiddish song should become so popular in America. And
how does the song go?
Bei mir bist du schön, bei mir hast du Chen, da 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 da. It's a typical Yiddish song, and it was one of the top songs of that particular year in America.
Was it hard leaving your parents the day you left?
Yes, but I don't want to overemphasize that. We were so anxious to get out that, and we knew that there was no choice. And we were reasonably confident that our parents would follow us. And the parents, of course, wanted us to get out, so that our parting was something that we simply accepted as a necessity.
It wasn't that emotional?
Not enormously. There was no copious weeping. There was sadness about it, but we were confident that we would see our parents again.
When you arrived in the States, did you immediately, how soon after that were you at the university, Cincinnati, HUC?
Within about 3 weeks or so. And this time Rochelle went with me to Cincinnati, where we tried, well, at first she lived in New York with my aunt, so that I would get to Cincinnati first and see what could be done. As soon as I got to Cincinnati, I inquired with the Jewish Social Service whether there was any way in which my sister could be accommodated. They found a place for her where she could do light housework. I think there may have been 1 or 2 children in the same family, and she would return for that, receive room and board. She would also, I was told, receive some kind of vocational training. And so with this assurance, Rochelle came to Cincinnati while I was housed at the dormitory of the Hebrew Union College. That was still, I think, toward the end of August. And
before that, you were in New York?
I was in New York and in Long Island, enjoying a very hot summer on the beach.
With your aunt?
With my aunt and her daughter and son-in-law, who were nice to us, treated us, took us out, and showed us entertainment.
When you arrived on the ship, what was it like arriving into
Well, the unforgettable sight, of course, was the Liberty Statue of Liberty. I think that was a time when I really had tears in my eyes, so tears of joy. It was wonderful. Shortly afterwards, we were, of course, in full view of Manhattan and the skyscrapers. And, it was an overwhelming view to start with. Tremendous city. Of course, we didn't come from a small village either. Vienna was a big city, too. There were a few humorous moments when Clara and her husband, Mandy, that is to say, the daughter of our aunt, wanted to impress us with the technological wonders of America. And I remember her taking us to a toilet and flushing and said, "Do you have that in Vienna?" And I said, "Of course we have that in Vienna." And then Mandy insisted that we had a taste of America's favorite drink, Coca-Cola. I thought it was awful. I couldn't stand the taste of it. And Rochelle didn't like it particularly either, but we got used to it. Before long, we liked the drink of Coca-Cola. I couldn't warm up to baseball and some other American hobbies, which Mandy did his best to explain. But it wasn't not too much time passed, and I was already in Cincinnati.
What about cigarettes?
I did not smoke at that time at all. I did get into smoking at the Hebrew Union College in my third or fourth year when sales agents of Chesterfield would visit all of the campuses wherever possible and hand out free packs of cigarettes in order to induce students to become smokers. But I do want to tell you something about the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. First of all, I arrived in Cincinnati in August. Terrible, hot, moist, humid weather, and the heavy smog or smell of Procter and Gamble factories hung over the city. Well, the campus of Cincinnati Hebrew Union College was attractive, not huge, but attractive. I was taken to the dormitory, greeted in a very friendly way. I was shown my room, and I couldn't believe my eyes, because in the middle of this room, which I was to share with one of the other older students at the Hebrew Union College, who was also studying to be a rabbi, was a huge saddle with leather boots and the equipment for horseback riding. I was amazed. I said, "This is a rabbinical seminary, and they got students here who spend their time riding horses." Well, as I stood there in amazement, sure enough, my roommate showed up, a fellow by the name of Al Bronson from Texas, who was very friendly, very curious about an Austrian Viennese. He took me under his wings. He was the only student at that time actually who had a car, a Packard. Today, when you visit the Hebrew Union College, you can't find a place to park. Every student has a car, but in those days he was the only one.
Is he the guy who used to throw his alarm clock or something?
Well, that was another one.
Oh, okay.
Because we had different buddies with whom we shared our room each year. But this first year I was with Al Bronson, and they purposely put me together with him so that I would pick up English faster. I soon found out that there were 7 or 8 other German-speaking students who had come from various parts of Germany. I was the only Austrian.
Did you start take up a southern accent because of him?
No, not really. I did learn, however, some of the basics of American life and American manners through him, and largely he was socially very popular. Through him, I soon received invitations to fraternities and sororities, and people were very friendly in Cincinnati. My adjustment was made easy. And the same is true of Rochelle. She would often visit me at the Hebrew Union College, have lunch with me or dinner, and she got to know dozens of students, and many of these students dated her, so she loved it.
what about your English? How was that? How long did it take before your
Slow
English
process.
developed?
Very slow process. The first year was agony. It was difficult to speak and very difficult to read English. And I had to take courses at the University of Cincinnati at the same time as I was studying at the Hebrew Union College. It was very difficult. It was very difficult.
Ask Grandma. No, don't ask Grandma. How did Rochelle and you deal with your accents?
Well, it wasn't a question of accent, it was just a question of basic understanding comprehension of reading matter that we had to do. We had a special speech teacher at the Hebrew Union College to train the students in public speaking, and my teacher was very satisfied with me. She thought that it would take a couple of years before I would become really fluent, and as a courtesy to Rochelle, she gave her a trial. And I remember Rochelle getting up to the desk and reading a few paragraphs, and then this teacher stopped and said, "Rochelle, it's useless. You'll never get rid of your accent." And she was prophetic. Rochelle still has quite a heavy accent. I managed largely to learn English rather fast because I was in a completely English-speaking environment. Nearly all the students would speak English only, and not German. Rochelle, on the other hand, went back to New York and lived with my parents who spoke German to her. And so I think the environment had something to do with it, but also the nature of her voice or vocal equipment, whichever it is, whatever determines an accent, made it very difficult for her to really get rid of her accent.
How long were you at HUC before you met Mom?
I was at the Hebrew Union College, I think, approximately 3 years before I met Mom. And
got the happiest day of your life?
I would say so. I would say that from the very first day on, my life in Cincinnati was a very happy, interesting life, pleasant life. We lived in, as I look back upon it now, in luxury. We had room service, meals were served, even our laundry was taken care of by the staff of the Hebrew Union College. It was a wonderful life. The courses were of mixed quality. Some were very interesting, some were very boring, some were poorly taught, but as a whole, the environment was supportive and helpful. Also, the people of Cincinnati, I made many friends in Cincinnati. That was the time. I had barely been there a year when I met and made the friendship of Aviva. At that time, her name was Putman. Her parents invited me to their home many a Friday evening for Shabbat dinners, and I became a leader for a couple of years of a Habonim club, Zionist club in Cincinnati. So our friends were not only at the Hebrew Union College, but in the wider community. It was a very happy time for me.
And did you go out with Aviva Kaufman?
Yes, yes. Socially, occasionally to see a movie or something, but I was not really that drawn to her. As a friend, yes, but I had no other interest in her. Within a year or so, I was sent out to congregations. My first pulpit was in Opelousas, Louisiana, in the deepest French-speaking parts of Louisiana, where I conducted high holiday services and delivered my first sermons. how I had the guts to do that, I'll never understand, because I could hardly speak English. But for that matter, one might say that these people in Louisiana could hardly understand English. So it was a good match. And then you asked about when did I meet Mom. I think it was in 1940, 41.
We'll have to get Mom on the...
Yes, that was, I got my BA degree from the University of Cincinnati in 1940, and I think it was shortly after that that I met Mom. And
right, and that was...
that was at the Isaac and Weiss Temple at a college dance,
right.
college dinner dance, and it didn't occur to me that she had not yet graduated from high school because she was at the college dinner dance.
So she was, how old was she then?
She was an intruder. She was then 16 years old.
An intruder?
An intruder in the dance. And the reason why she was there is that her older sister Ruth was the president of the college club of the Isaac and Weiss Temple, so she took her kid sister along. I didn't know that.
Did she tell you how old she was?
No, I didn't ask her how old she was.
But when did you find out how old she was?
Well, first of all, I asked a friend of mine who knew her family to introduce me to her because she caught my attention very quickly. And
how old were you?
I was then just about 22 years old.
Right.
22 years. Yeah, she was 6 years old.
She was 16.
Yes. So I was 22. And I was introduced, and I took out once or twice, not yet asking about what schooling she was doing. We went to dance, to dinner, something else, the restaurant. I forgot exactly what our first few dates were. And then word got around that I had dated her, and some of my fellow students at the HUC had been her Sunday school teachers. He said, "Gosh, are you crazy? You know that you are robbing the cradle? You're taking out a girl who hasn't even graduated from high school?" Well, I was in shock, and I decided there and then that I would date her only once a month. And so I paced my dating with her in order to make sure that she'd get a little older before I would date her more often. But I must say that I did really fall in love instantly.
With a 16-year-old?
Well, she was 16, getting 16 and a half, a little like that.
16 and a half, sorry.
16, close to 16 and a half.
That is a big difference.
Yes. In fact, it was on Valentine's Day of, I think, the year 1941 that we had our first date. So it must be February 1941.
Are you saying during your first two dates, hold on, Jerry, make that. You didn't ask her how old she was, you had no idea?
No, I didn't ask her yet. But we talked about other things, about Isaac Weiss Temple, about HUC and this and that. Michael, I'm going to have to now...
Okay.
Handle that?
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. Should we continue with your mom?
Yeah. All right, I'll take whatever needs to go down.
All right.
Jerry, let me tell you something. I didn't like what you were just doing to Jim. You don't do that. How would you like it if somebody did that to you? Would you like it if somebody did like that to you? Or pulled your hair? Would you like that? Jim doesn't like it. Don't do that. See what he did when you did that? He went... He doesn't like that. No, it's not funny. It's not nice. And it hurts him.
Mom, I'm leaving immediately.
Don't do it to him. You only make nice to Jim. Jim's an animal. He's a dog. He's not even a person. But he hurts just like people.